The first time Callan Thorne wrote the name Elias Mercer into the city archive, the ink blotted. He hissed under his breath and dabbed the parchment with sand. The stain refused to vanish, a dark halo around the letters. In the close, dust-rich air of the record room, the slightest imperfection felt like sacrilege. "Careful, Clerk Thorne," murmured Master Darren from the far desk. "Names are like beams. A flaw at the start, and the whole structure leans." "Yes, Master," Callan said. His hand was steady again, but his heart was not. He glanced at the open roll before him. It was the annual chronicle of civic works, a long parchment tracking bridges repaired, walls raised, mills commissioned. Typically, Callan recorded the same phrases year after year: routine maintenance of southern sluice, replacement of rotten pilings at river dock. This year's entries were different. Installation of modified bellows at Hale's Forge, increasing productivity by near half. Reconstruction of West Mill wheel with new paddle design, doubling grain throughput. Erection of lifting crane at Northern Curtain Wall, permitting one-day placement of stone courses formerly taking 3. And again, in the margins, the same note, design attributed to Elias Mercer of Mercer's Works. Callan's quill hovered. His gaze slid to the small window slit, where a thin lance of afternoon light pierced the gloom and caught dust motes in a slow, swirling dance. Somewhere outside, bells marked the 3rd hour. The sound reached the archives muffled, like memory under cloth. "Master," he said quietly, "if the same name appears so often, should it not be entered in the main hand?" Darren did not look up from his register of finds. "We record offices, not artisans. The city builds, men die." Callan's jaw tightened. "Yet the patterns. Patterns are for those who interpret." The old archivist's pen scratched on. "We only preserve." Callan stared again at Elias Mercer. The ink shone wetly. It looked, he thought, like an oil stain on water. Spreading. He finished the entry and sanded it carefully. But all through the rest of the afternoon, as he copied decrees and tallied taxes, that name burned in the corner of his vision. Mercer. The man the guild whispers called engine witch and the street children called maker of miracles. The man Callan had never seen. Yet. The archives of Valenreach were older than the current city walls. The first charter, granted when the town was only a fortified market by the river, lay in a chest bound with 3 locks and iron straps gone brown with age. Callan had seen it once, as a boy, when Master Darren had opened the chest for an inspection. The parchment had crackled like leaves under frost. "Remember," Darren had said, his voice dry as the pages around them. "What is written here outlives kings and crises. We decide what becomes the city's memory." At 16, Callan had taken that charge like a holy vow. At 35, hunched over ledgers by lamplight, he knew better. The city decided. Or rather, those who paid the city's scribes did. There were gaps in the archive. Callan knew their shapes intimately. Years where levies rose with no recorded cause. Seasons where riots were replaced by lines about necessary measures for civic harmony. Names scratched thin where guilds had fallen from favor. He had read enough to recognize omission as clearly as ink. Now, as the bells rang out over a changed city, mills louder, cranes groaning by the walls, carts rolling smoother over cobbles, Callan felt omission coiling again around his desk like smoke. "Clerk Thorne." He started. A shadow fell across his work. In the doorway of the record room stood Guildmaster Herrick of the Smiths, a broad man in formal black, guild chain heavy on his shoulders. 2 junior smiths flanked him, their hands raw and scarred, out of place amid parchment and quills. Callan rose and bowed just enough to be polite. "Guildmaster. How may the archive serve?" Herrick's gaze swept the shelves with faint distaste. "I have come regarding the new chronicle entries. The works of this Mercer." Callan's heartbeat ticked faster. "All civic works commissioned and funded through the council are recorded as they occur, by order of the charter." "Of course." Herrick offered a smile that did not reach his eyes. But it is the matter of record that matters. His name appears too prominently. It gives an impression. What impression would that be? That guild crafts and traditions have somehow been superseded by the cleverness of one ungilded tinker. The guildmaster's voice had steel beneath the silk. Our members will not have their decades of labor erased by a few strokes of your pen. Kalen felt his fingertips grow cold. The records are accurate. Accuracy. Herrick stepped closer, the scent of forged smoke clinging to him like an aura. You clerks love that word. But you serve the city, as we do. Valenreach thrives when its story is told properly. The people see more mills turning, more grain ground, more walls raised. They must understand this as proof of our patron's favor and the strength of the guild's stewardship. He tapped a thick finger on the open roll. Not as the handiwork of some solitary outsider. Kalen glanced down. Elias's name glared back at him from the fresh ink. What would you have me write? He asked softly. Herrick's smile returned. Record the works as innovations of the guilds of smiths and millers, inspired by Providence and guided by the council's wisdom. Note that a certain Elias Mercer assisted in their implementation where appropriate. That is not, entirely, true. The cranes stand. The mills grind. The walls rise. Herrick's voice hardened. The truth that matters is that Valenreach is stronger, not which set of hands set the first gear. Silence swelled between them. From the corridor outside came the distant scuff of other clerks' steps, the mutter of a scribe reciting a decree as he copied. Darren, at his desk, kept writing, but Kalen saw the slight tremor in the old man's hand. We will of course comply with the council's wishes, Darren said after a moment, his tone neutral. Herrick inclined his head. See that you do. He turned to go, then paused. Oh, and Clerk Thorne. Kalen looked up. Leave some room in your chronicles for the gods, Herrick said softly. They dislike being edited out. When they were gone, the air felt heavier. Master, Kalen whispered, we can't simply take his name away. The patterns. Patterns, Darren interrupted, are for scholars not yet born. He set down his pen and rubbed his eyes. We keep the city alive on paper, Kalen. That means we keep it governable. You've heard the mood on the streets. Some already call Mercer a prophet. Others call him a demon. Both are dangerous. But if we erase, nothing is erased. Darren's gaze flicked to the far wall, where shelves of older, less consulted rolls slumbered. Some truths simply move. Kalen followed his eyes and felt a chill. The first time Kalen saw Elias Mercer, the engineer was arguing with a gear. At least, that was how it looked. Mercer stood in the yard of Mercer's Works, a narrow courtyard between low workshops along the river. A half-assembled hoist loomed over him, and he held a small iron gear in one hand, scowling at it as if it had personally insulted him. No, he muttered. You're not the problem. The load is. Or the line. Or me. Kalen watched from the shadow of the archway, ledger clutched against his chest. He had come under the guise of verifying civic expenditures, a rare excursion from the archives that made his knees ache after so many stairs. Mercer looked younger than Kalen had expected. A few threads of gray laced his beard, but his movements were quick, impatient. His clothes were stained with oil and soot, his sleeves rolled past scarred forearms. His eyes, when he finally noticed Kalen, were very, very tired. Can I help you? Elias asked. Kalen realized he had been standing there for several breaths. I am Kalen Thorne, clerk of the city archives. He tugged his cloak straighter. I'm here to inspect the records of your commissions. Mercer raised an eyebrow. You're late. The last crane's already up. I'm inspecting accounts, not cranes. Kalen's voice steadied as he moved to familiar ground. The council requires corroboration between expenditure and result. Ah. Mercer tucked the gear into a pocket. Come in, then. Try not to trip over anything. Most of it is expensive and all of it is mine. Inside, Mercer's main workshop was a chaos Kalen found almost physically painful. Tools hung from pegs in seemingly random order. Gears of various sizes lay stacked in baskets. Chalk diagrams covered every scrap of wall not already occupied by shelves. Yet in the center of the chaos stood a bench of astonishing tidiness. On it sat a row of narrow wooden rods, each finely marked with small notches and numbers. Next to them lay discs of metal, all precisely the same size. Kalen drifted toward them, curiosity tugging like a string. "What are these?" "Standards," Mercer said. There was a quiet pride in his voice. "Lengths and gauges. If you want parts to fit, you have to agree what one finger actually is. Turns out everyone's fingers are different." Kalen touched one rod lightly. The surface was smooth as bone. "And the guilds accept this?" Mercer snorted. "The guilds accept anything that makes them money. Eventually." He moved to a shelf, pulling down a ledger bound in rough leather. Kalen opened it and felt his heartbeat quicken for a different reason. The entries were neat, precise, and detailed. Not just costs and materials, but sketches of mechanisms, notes on failures, revisions. Bellows Mark II, improved flow, but leather fatigue at joint after 3 weeks. Solution, double stitching, revised hinge. "You keep your own record," Kalen said slowly. Mercer shrugged. "Memory lies. Paper lies less." Kalen thought of Herrick's finger tapping the chronicle. Of Darren's gaze slipping toward the older shelves. "You could deposit copies of these in the archives," he heard himself say. "Personal papers are sometimes accepted for posterity." Mercer's mouth quirked. "Posterity doesn't pay for charcoal. And I doubt the guilds would thank you for preserving their growing dependence on me." "You care what they think?" "I care what they do." Mercer's eyes darkened. "They smashed my windows once. Sand in the coal. Small things. Warnings." Kalen looked back at the ledger. The pages smelled of iron, ink, and sweat. Of work. "You should still have a record," Kalen murmured. "Something that tells the truth." Mercer laughed softly. "Truth? Clerk, I tear up my own pages when the design changes. Truth is a draft I keep rewriting." Kalen met his gaze. "For us," he said, "truth is what survives the rewriting." Their eyes held for a moment. Then Mercer looked away first. "Take whatever notes you need. Just don't get your robes caught in anything. There's a gear train over there that bites." That night, Kalen did something he had never done in his 15 years at the archive. He stayed after the lamps were doused. Darren, complaining of his joints, had gone home early. The last junior scribe had left, yawning, locking the outer door behind him. Kalen remained in the record room, a single candle guttering on his desk, surrounded by the breathing darkness of parchment and wood. He stood, hard hammering, and crossed to the far wall. To the shelves Darren's gaze always slid toward when words like truth grew sharp. Here lay the supplements, registers never copied to the public chronicon, drafts that contradicted final versions, letters from counselors tucked between ledgers like pressed leaves. Kalen's fingers hovered, then closed on a narrow roll labeled in old ink, on the recalibration of the tithes of 312. He remembered that year's entry in the official chronicle, increase of tithe by 1/10 to support fortification repairs. A simple, clean statement. The draft in his hand told a different story. Guild of Smiths petitions for higher levy on ungilded laborers, citing moral hazard. Council debates. Fears unrest. Compromise, public reason, fortification repairs, actual distribution, 3 parts to guild subsidies, 1 to walls. Kalen's throat tightened. Another roll. On the suppression of the bread riot. The Chronicle, minor disturbance resolved. The Supplement, 4 hanged. 2 records expunged at request of Guild of Bakers. Kalen sank onto a nearby stool, the parchment limp in his hands. The archives did not just preserve the city's memory. They stratified it. A clean surface story for public eyes, a sediment of uneasier truth beneath, accessible only to those who knew where to dig. He thought of Mercer's standards, neat and fixed. Of Herrick's insistence on proper stories. "What are you doing, Kaelin?" He almost dropped the roll. Darren stood in the doorway, cloak around his shoulders, face shadowed. "I thought you'd gone home," Kaelin stammered. "I did." Darren stepped inside, closing the door quietly. "Then I remembered the look on your face when Herrick spoke. I've seen that look before in young clerks who think words can save the world." He took the roll from Kaelin's hands, glanced at it, and sighed. "These shelves hold the city's second soul," Darren said. "The truth you're so hungry for. But tell me, boy, what happens if the wrong truth reaches the wrong ears at the wrong time? Is there a right time for a lie?" Kaelin shot back, sharper than he intended. Darren's age lined deeper around his eyes. "You think I haven't asked that? We walk a narrow beam, you and I, too much revelation and the city burns. Too much concealment and it rots from within." He touched the roll's edge gently. "Elias Mercer has given Valenreach power. Power frightens people. Frightened people look for villains or saints. Then we should show them a man." Darren shook his head. "They don't read our rolls, Kaelin. Only the ones who already wield power do. And they want pliable stories, not complicated men. Then why keep these?" Kaelin gestured to the shelves. "Why record any of it, if it is only to be hidden?" "Because someday," Darren said quietly, "someone will need to know how we got here. And they will not have anyone left to ask." He set the roll back, his fingers lingering. "You asked, earlier, whether Mercer's name should be given space. The guilds will have their chronicle. That is their memory." He nodded to the shadowed shelves. "This can be yours." In the following months, the story of Valenreach split in two. In the public chronicle, Kaelin's handwriting dutifully recorded, by grace of Providence and under the guidance of the guilds, new mills and lifting devices have increased the city's bounty. Elias Mercer appeared only as an assistant, a name tucked after commas. But in the supplements, in a narrower, more cramped script, another narrative grew. Elias Mercer designs new bellows system increasing forge output by 2/3. Guild of Smiths claims credit publicly, private memorandum acknowledges dependence on Mercer's jigs and standards. Mercer's water-driven lathe permits production of uniform axles. Guild of Wheelwrights expresses concern over loss of artisanal variation, cites fears of soulless wheels. Council debates providing Mercer with official guild rank to placate opposition. Guild of Smiths refuses, citing tradition. Kaelin wrote it all. His quill scratched late into the night, long after the city bells fell silent. Ink stained his fingers black. Sometimes he visited Mercer's works again, under official pretexts. He watched new devices take shape, a hoist that could be operated by one man instead of four, a brake system that prevented wagons from careening downhill. People called them miracles. Mercer called them improvements. "Do you believe in gods, clerk?" the engineer asked him one evening, as they stood by the river watching a newly balanced ferry glide smoother than it had any right to. Kaelin considered. "I believe in records." Mercer chuckled. Spoken like a man who's never had a gearbox shear under full load. Kaelin smiled faintly, then sobered. "They are reframing your work as divine favor." "Of course they are." Mercer's jaw set. "It's safer to thank an invisible hand than to admit a man changed the rules." "Does that anger you?" "It terrifies me." Mercer's voice was low. "Today they call it favor. Tomorrow, if something goes wrong, they'll call it blasphemy. Either way, the math doesn't care." "The math?" Mercer traced a pattern on the railing with an oily fingertip. "Force. Distance. Load. Human bone only tolerates so much. You can pray all you like, if you overload a rope, it snaps." Kaelin thought of Herrick's warning about gods disliking omission. "Some would say you're overloading the city," he said carefully. "Too much change, too fast. They were starving, Mercer replied. Now they eat. They broke their backs hauling stone, now they haul less. I didn't give them wings, clerk. I gave them better pulleys. He glanced sideways. What do you write about me in your books? Kalen hesitated. That you design machines and methods that change how the city works. Nothing about demons or divine whispers? Not in my hand. Mercer's eyes searched his face. Good, he said finally. Leave miracles to the priests. I just count forces. The day the first crane collapsed, killing 2 men and mangling a third, Kalen felt the archive's walls press inward like a closing fist. It was a small crane at the river dock, built in haste, operated by workers from another town who ignored Elias's cautions about load limits. The rope snapped with a sound like a whip, the beam swung wild, and bodies crumpled under it. By dusk, rumors had become accusations. The gods had been offended. Mercer's devices were cursed. This was what happened when men reached beyond their station. At dawn, Herrick stood in the archive again, flanked this time not by junior smiths but by a city guard. The council will designate the collapse a warning from above, he said without preamble. A reminder of humility. The Chronicle will reflect this. Kalen's mouth was dry. The inspection reports note overloading beyond the rated capacity. The fault lay with the operators. Herrick's gaze was cold. Do you think the widows and the priests care about capacity? They need a narrative that restores order, not one that blames human error in a system half the city barely understands. He leaned closer. You will record that the council, in its wisdom, has limited further constructions of new devices pending divine guidance and guild review. Which is not what the minutes say, Kalen managed. He had seen the draft decree. It was full of hedged phrases and compromise. The minutes are for us, Herrick said. The Chronicle is for the city. After he left, Darren sat heavily at his desk, as if the years had finally caught up with him. You see now, the old man murmured. We do not just copy. We choose. Every word is a fulcrum. Kalen stared at the blank line waiting for his pen. On it, the city's memory would tilt one way or the other. On his right lay the official decree. On his left, the inspection report with its brutal, clear numbers. He picked up his quill. In the Chronicle, in a careful, even hand, he wrote. This year, a dock crane failed, claiming 3 lives. The council, discerning the need for humility and seeking divine favor, decreed a pause on further works of like nature, that all might reflect and proceed with respect. Then, once the ink dried, he drew a tiny mark in the margin, a dot that meant see supplement, a symbol only archivists knew. He turned to a thin, private register and wrote there, in tighter script. Cause, operator ignored prescribed load limits, exceeding recommended safe mass by 1/3. Rope failure was predictable. Mercer's design sound. Failure was human, not mechanical nor divine. His hand shook, but he did not stop. Years later, after Darren's death and Herrick's retirement, after Mercer's beard had gone fully gray and his hands had begun to tremble from some ailment no one had a name for, Kalen stood alone in the archive's deepest room. Outside, Valenreach hummed with a new rhythm. The mills turned steadily. Wagons moved on better wheels. Cranes, redesigned and reinforced, swung loads with cautious grace. The city was wealthier, louder, more complex. In the official chronicles, the story was clear. Valenreach had prospered by guild wisdom under heaven's watchful eye. Innovation was a blessing granted to the city as a whole, not to any one man. Elias Mercer's name appeared here and there, an assistant, a tool. In the supplements, another story coiled, layered year upon year. A story of an engineer who had stepped out of time and into a city that did not know what to do with him. Of guilds who feared and exploited him. Of cranes that lifted burdens from human backs and of ropes that sometimes still snapped. Of an archivist who had tried, in ink and margins, to keep the contours of causality intact. Kalen held in his hands a slim volume he had never shown to anyone. Its cover was plain. Inside, the title read, "On the Works and Methods of Elias Mercer, commonly called the Engineer of Valenreach." It contained no theology. Only descriptions, diagrams painstakingly copied from Mercer's own ledgers with permission, notes on failures and improvements, and observations of how each device had changed daily life in the city. At the end, he had written a single line in a slightly larger hand. "Measure twice. Think always." He ran a finger over the words, thinking of the sign that hung in Mercer's workshop, carved deep into the wood. He could deposit this volume quietly among the supplements, where only future historians might someday find it. Or he could place it, defiant, among the official chronicles, where the guilds would see and object and perhaps have it removed, or perhaps, by then, shrug and let it stand. The choice sat like a stone in his gut. Darren's voice whispered in memory, "Too much revelation and the city burns. Too much concealment and it rots." Mercer's, raspier now with age, "Truth? I keep rewriting it." Kalen walked to the shelf where the current century's chronicles sat in orderly rows. Spaces waited for years yet to come. The city's future, in blank parchment. He slipped the slim volume between the chronicles of the present decade. Not hiding it among the deepest supplements. Not placing it on the highest, most obvious shelf. Simply, shelving it where a careful eye might find it and a careless one might not. A compromise, like so many decrees. "Let them argue," he murmured to the quiet room. "Let them call it heresy or history. At least the record exists." He stepped back. The spine disappeared among others. From outside, faint but clear, came the peal of bells. Once, they had marked only the hours of prayer and curfew. Now they also marked shifts at mills, timings of crane work, the precise start and end of labor calibrated to the turning of new gears. Elias Mercer would not live to see all the consequences of his designs. Neither would Kalen. But on these shelves, some trace of the choices they had made, what to build, what to record, what to omit, would endure. He returned to his desk and took up his quill. A new day's chronicle waited, blank and patient. Kalen dipped the pen, paused for just a heartbeat, and smiled to himself. Then he began to write.